Today, I'm interviewing Lorraine Marino. She lives in Philadelphia and she's a consultant helper there. She also teaches and gives workshops in this country and abroad. So, Lorraine, that is an impressive background. And what I'd like to find out is how did you find Pathwork or how did Pathwork find you?
Mhm. I will thank you, Susan. Well, going back in the early 80s, I was looking for a therapist who also had a spiritual orientation because I had always been more of a spiritual seeker. And I was like what they call a spiritual window shopper. I studied, I could make a list. And someone gave me the name of Carolyn Tylove, who was a therapist in Center City. I went to see her. She told me about the path work, and she said, there's a class starting in Phoenicia, New York, which was the center at the time. Why don't you look into it? And very unlike me, I signed up and thus began the 5 years of a year-long TP, and then divine sexuality, and then I studied helpership. So I owe it to Carolyn as my opening door to pathwork.
Well, I saw her on an interview that Kim Fitzgerald conducted, and I fell in love with her.
Yeah, yeah, yes. She's very important.
Yeah. So you have been involved with Pathwork for maybe almost 40 years,
Right.
and you're very, very involved with racism, with trying to help people understand how to work with racism.
Mm-hmm.
How have Pathwork principles affected how you work with anti-racism?
That's a really good question, Susan. I'm going to try to be, I could teach about a day on why I think it helped. But first of all, if it wasn't for my work in pathwork, I wouldn't have opened my eyes to racism in the way that I did. Um, Pathwork teaches us fantastic tools to look within, to look at where we're in error, in duality, in negativity, and then how that affects our outer life. But it teaches us to look at these things in ourselves without making us all bad. It's just part of holding ourselves in wholeness. Well, I was in the uh, graced to be with a number of colleagues who are African American. And over time, they would talk about their experiences as Black people, experiences I didn't have to deal with.
Yeah.
And I would often say to them, well, that wasn't really racism. That was somebody just was unkind. I was making excuses.
Mhm.
Thankfully, through their confrontation to me, and I had this concept of the idealized self-image from Pathwork. I thought, oh my God, I maybe I have an image of myself that I'm a good, caring person, I'm not racist, and maybe that is blinding me to something inside of me. And sure enough, it was. My willingness to take a blow to my idealized self-image as an aware, enlightened person let me see how much I had programming living in me about racism. We all grow up ingesting messages. So that opened me up to realizing, how can I be so blind? There can't be racism without white people contributing. This isn't a Black person's problem.
Yeah.
And so I, over time, built a program with another colleague and what I did was bring pathwork tools to do the self work to look at embedded racism in us. but also to teach us how to come from love of our fellow people, not just to act as righteous white people and I'm going to make you bad. The path really helps us get in touch with the love that prompts taking courageous stands. So I could go on about the many tools the pathwork gives us for self-work that are applicable in working at not just racism, but any area where we have unconscious creations in us that contribute to the larger consciousness. It could be around homophobia, sexism, religious differences. So let me pause there to see if that's enough of an answer so I don't go on and on.
It makes me wish that I could participate in one of your workshops.
Well, you could, yeah.
Well, in terms of racism and all the hatred that is so active in the world today, what in pathwork helps you to believe that love will be the stronger principle?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really good question. I'd like to first say, what is the ultimate goal of our path? This is a path that teaches us how to move toward union, toward oneness. That's what this path is. We work to look to reconcile the dual consciousness, the hundred thinking, the either or, the me or you, and to work it such that we are able to have union. And that's ultimately what this path work is about. It is a path of love. Now, so given that, if you really do the work of reconciling these differences within us and find that powerful place of love and acceptance, you sort of know within you that even if I don't rectify the outer hate, although I believe that we influence it, but I'll come back to that. How I am in relation to what's going on in the world is important. Do I meet hatred with hatred?
Yeah.
Or am I able to feel the pain of this outer hate and really do the work? Because I believe when we do our inner work, the most wonderful gift is that we are able to bring in more of our spiritual consciousness into the world. That is the most exciting, invigorating benefit of this path, is that I open to be penetrated by the divine when I am open in that acceptance state. And it is that greater power that can come into me. That is our work, to bring our spiritual self into this incarnation, into the world. And you've probably experienced that kind of thing yourself.
Yeah, I have.
So I think that this outer world is continually giving us opportunities. How do I want to respond?
Mm.
Do I want to open to the God in me and respond from that? Or do I want to stay defended and resistant and reacting? It's a temptation, and we might have to start there with reacting. But we have such powerful tools to find the love within. So again, let me pause so I don't go on to teaching
Well,
in teaching mode.
yes, we do have powerful tools. And I'm wondering if those can ever come into conflict, like the law of being responsible for working on oneself and the law of brotherhood, sisterhood,
Mhm.
where we are also responsible for the well-being of those beyond us. Can it happen that what is good for me is not good for the sisterhood?
Yeah, it's a very good question. My short answer is there can never be a conflict in what is for your highest good and mine. The guide actually refers to that. It may not seem it initially, um, but absolutely not. But you raise a really a passionate point that I have right now in our path work, and that is, first of all, the spiritual laws. You mentioned personal responsibility and the law of brotherhood, sisterhood. Just a little aside, I have had wonderful people give feedback who are gender neutral in the path say, we maybe need to have a different term than brother and sister.
Yes.
I haven't figured that out, but new challenge. For now, we'll use that law. First of all, the guide talks about in lecture 7, all the spiritual laws are interconnected. Envision, the guide calls it a network of lights, of rays, all interconnected. They all work together. Because what our spiritual laws are an aspect of God. The guide says God is both personal and impersonal. Impersonal in that if we follow these laws, we will experience God. So they are never in conflict. So if you think about it, if I follow personal responsibility and I look within myself and what I create, what if I'm creating harm for another? Well, how can I really be self-responsible by saying, well, I'm okay. I've worked on my problems. I'm so sorry I'm affecting you. No, the guide talks about the importance of seeing our interconnection with each other. So to me, it's extremely important for us to see these two things work together. If we look at racism or any of the isms, if I am looking at myself as a white person, let's use race, and I see, oh, I have some negative beliefs, some stereotypical beliefs about people who are from another country or African American. Well, if I take responsibility for those and I see that I'm contributing in some way to this collective dynamic of racism, if I am to care about my impact on others, if I and my brother and sister are one, how can I ignore that?
Absolutely, but it can be so difficult to have the courage to look inside and
Yeah,
find what
yeah,
is contributing to the problem, not.
yes, yeah. That's part of our tools. And I think we have to really learn, if we do this inner work, we have to have self-acceptance. We're not looking within to punish ourselves. We're
Right.
looking within. It's like you might have to feel like oh, that's so hard to see. But we have to look at the bigger reason for doing that, which is in the healing and seeing that's part of us. That's not all. The ugliest thing is only part of us. When
Yeah.
I am willing to look at that, I can see that whatever that ugly thing is ultimately divine energy gone awry. Nothing in us, nothing in us is not of divine origin that has been twisted or misused. What a wonderful benefit if I look at the bigger picture for doing that is I release or reclaim that divine aspect in me. Let me just pause and see if that you have to maybe control the teacher in me that will keep going, Susan.
Well, I have been a teacher too, but I am learning from a greater source of knowledge than I have. I do have a question.
Sure.
Can you think of a term that would be gender neutral to replace sisterhood, brotherhood?
Oh, well, one was given to me from someone in the path who is gender neutral, and they recommended kinship, the law of kinship.
Ah, I like that.
Yeah, I haven't tested that anywhere. I've been sort of using that. Part of me feels I should get more input from people in the path who don't relate to male or female and see what they think. But that's what we have for now.
Well, I like that. And I guess I could bring that up for the Pittsburgh area. Just try that out.
Yeah, see, if you're that's very courageous of you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I want to be all inclusive and I don't want any
yeah.
limitations in language to.
Yeah. Well, let's use that little example as part of what we're talking about. Let's say you decide to do that. First of all, it's an act of courage because you're challenging something that we are so accustomed to, this binary reality.
Yeah,
What? What? I have to give up male and female? When we're challenged to our thinking and our habits are challenged. So you might get pushback. And then what? How will you react? That person's such a pain in the neck, it's all, every little thing is a challenge to how will you bring this desire you have for being inclusive, which is a beautiful thing. Then how will you respond if you get challenged? You know, not that you have to answer that, but it's a great example for how our path work has to continually be at work. All right, if someone challenges me or critiques me, will I be able to hold that person without like making them bad or
yeah,
wrong? Will I back down and say this is too hard and get scared? So, not that you have to answer it, but it's a little encapsulation of all the tools that we have to bring to live these values, these spiritual laws.
yes. Well, that's what I want to do, to live the values.
Yeah.
Um, but that opens a wider question for me. Hatred is so active in the world, and I am a little person.
Mhm.
How can I best bring my gifts to try to help the world live more in kinship?
Mm. Yeah. It's such a important question. And right now, so many people say to me, it feels like the world's on fire, you know? Well, if we look at what it is, it's the harm of separation, of duality. The everything in the path we talk about, looking at our lower self. The lower self is anything that separates. It is the root of harm and division. That which moves to unite is healing. Well, we're so caught in polarity and duality right now. Now, we can't change the earth plane we live on. We are here on a plane of duality to learn how to deal with duality. So we're not going to cure ills of the world, but there's so much about how do we respond to it. So to answer your question, I would say on the first level, it's to look at how am I responding to what I'm seeing? Am I withdrawing? Am I like thinking the world is bad? And, do I go into some form of defense or duality? We're not bad, but that is the first place to look. How can I find a way to move into feeling and accepting and being present to what is? The guide says love can only grow in, I love this phrase, the fertile soil of reality. I must be in reality and see and still not go into the fight. No, this shouldn't be. It should be otherwise. And that means feeling feelings. It's painful when we really look at what's happening in the world. I don't mean like, oh God, to really allow to feel the sadness, the grief. But when we do that, then it is to find what are gifts I have? Where is one place I could contribute? Now, I want to back up and say the first place I contribute is, is creating a positive consciousness. We can contribute to the greater pool of goodness, of consciousness, or we can contribute to the negative pool. Because everything first is created in the spiritual level, the consciousness level. The guide says war is first created when there's enough pool in consciousness of warring thoughts. Then it is enough, then it manifests.
Yeah.
So we can contribute from another consciousness. That's contributing goodness. And then we can see if there's something to do in the world of action that is informed from a love consciousness, a desire to serve a greater value, not to make the other bad. Let me check if, is that making any
Oh,
sense?
it does completely because, well, compared with what I used to do, I'm no longer as active politically as I was. But I still tend to charge in saying, I know what should be going on.
Right. Yeah, that's so honest. I mean, I think all of us do. And working with young activists, there's often like, I'm going to do this. I'm fighting because I'm going to prove you're bad, or I'm really fighting my parent on some level. No, the powerful activist is coming from love of something greater. I am not coming from hating you. I might hate the ignorance that is driving you, but
And
I
there's
am,
such ignorance.
yeah,
And that tends to be judgmental, but there is so much.
yes, it causes harm. But it's one thing to work against ignorance, and it's another to hate it or to come back at someone with also with vitriol
Right.
or
Right.
arrogance, like I'm right, you're wrong, I know better. Yeah, to really like what is the greater value I want to serve, even if it means a risk to me. You know, for
Yeah.
me, it became more important to follow my value on anti-racism, on justice for people I knew and loved. It meant like taking hits, it meant risk. But if I could continue to focus on what do I really stand for? What is love say to follow?
Yeah.
Not my anger or my hate. Although the guide makes a point that healthy anger is important.
Yes.
Without healthy anger, we would have no justice.
Mhm. I
And
believe that.
I think the other part of your question is we need to also watch where we collude in silence when we see something wrong happening. The guide in 244, one of my favorite lectures, it is a greater evil to be passive and collude silently with something that is a transgression. It is a greater evil than the perpetrator. It even refers to the Holocaust and the genocide in Germany, that the greater evil were the silence of people who allowed it. And that's very powerful.
It is, but it also brings up the question of how do you gain the courage to step out of yourself and say, this is wrong?
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good question and something we work on in the anti-racism training. It comes back to another focal theme in the lecture. It's about life and death. Am I willing to die to the small ego? Might be my safety or my pride, so as to have something greater, to stand for something greater. Now, I'm
Yes.
not saying people should put their life on the line, and when they're not prepared to take something on. But I think the courage comes from finding, what do I really want to stand for here?
Oh, that is such a powerful question, Lorraine.
Yeah,
Would you say it once more?
yeah. The courage comes from really finding, what do I really stand for? And what am I willing to stand for? To me, that is expressing the God, where I might say, I want to stand for my value on brotherhood, on healing. And that is so important to me that I'm willing to take whatever critique might happen, because there's something more important to me than my ego or how I look to other people.
Yes.
But this requires some work, some
Yes, it
inner work.
does. And then this is a different slant on the question,
Mhm,
but taking the self as the starting point for work,
mhm,
it's so much easier to try to do something overt and outward. How invite people in a loving way to come inside and begin work on themselves?
mm. That's a good question. When you said over, were you going to say it's so much easier to point to the other person and try to change them? Or,
Yes, yes.
yeah, I know. Wouldn't that be so much easier?
And so completely fruitless.
Right, right, right. Yeah. Wow, that's a really good question. How do we invite them in? Well, I think maybe by telling people, how has it worked for them in the past to try to change somebody else? I haven't yet had a group where anybody said that really works. Have you? Have you?
Oh, heavens, no.
Yeah, yeah. And then I would maybe help people with some examples of why looking within can be so potent. I like to first invite people to look within and find goodness that they don't know how to name or they're ashamed to say. We think looking within is only about finding crap in there. Well, looking within is also about discovering what is wonderful, what your gifts are. So I like to make sure I invite people to first, like, I'll share with you, someone told me that Eva, one time working with someone, and then this someone became my helper, and my helper said this to me: who are you not to acknowledge what gifts you're carrying inside that are meant to be used in the world? She said, don't give me that shy stuff. Tell me what you're carrying. And I'm not saying we start there, but the point is, we are all carrying gifts. We have a
Oh,
little
yes.
treasure chest here.
I believe that so
Do
strongly.
you? Well,
Oh,
there you go.
yes.
Yeah. So I need to understand what those are too, so I can bring them forward. We all, and especially path workers, have so much potential to create light, to create healing, to bring a new consciousness to the world, to counter, not even to counter, but to overwhelm the negative consciousness, because we understand how to create conciliation, this sense of oneness and unity, even if it means I disagree with you. If I'm not hating you, we are in a more harmonious relationship.
And
So,
it requires such patience to take the long view.
yeah, yeah, but we can do that. We've done harder things,
Yes.
right? But it is true that this is not an easy path. It's even in the lectures, in one of the lectures, the guide says this isn't going to be a path for everyone, for the masses. It calls on us to really do a lot, to do some hard things. But it's also incredibly rewarding. For
Yes, it is.
me, it's the deepest work that I've done.
Oh, yes, by far the deepest that I just wish I had been much younger when I discovered path work.
Right. Yeah, I know. It would be wonderful if we could all sort of learn some of these things as children, right? But
Yeah,
you might not have been ready.
I probably was not.
Right, right. And it doesn't mean that you're not leapfrogging in ways that you couldn't have as a young woman. But have I answered your questions in a way that have been helpful, Susan?
I believe so. I really do. Is there anything you'd like to say before we close that hasn't
Um,
come up that, but you think would be helpful for people to keep in mind?
wow, that's a really good question because um, I do. There are so many things to say with some of your questions, but I was also trying to be concise.
Yeah.
Um, yes. Well, I think something I want to say is on this two things on the question you said about the law of personal responsibility and the law of, let's say, kinship. To me, this is an essential discussion point for our pathwork community at large. We're living in a time where people are becoming aware of their social identity. They are willing to challenge uh, hiding in the closet. Now, people who identify as gay, for instance, it's still a danger for people in certain parts of the world, in certain
Yes.
parts of our country, to acknowledge they are gay. So we have people in our sphere who are threatened, who are vulnerable. It's the same thing with people who are African Americans or from a different religion. We have people who, on a personal level, may be our friends, but we have to be aware that we all also carry a social identity, how we are seen at our group level. So I am Lorraine, you are Susan, but seen by someone from another country, they see you as part of a group, a white woman. Well, we don't really think about that. I never really thought I was part of a group. I wasn't even aware there were white people as a group,
I know.
or American going overseas. And then you see how people see you as your group identity, American. So, and then we could name all these different social identities. Well, we have to become aware that these social identities have to be acknowledged, and we have to understand in the path work what that might mean for some of our brothers and sisters. So I might have a path worker who is Arab. I may get to know this person as an individual, but what if this person in their Arab identity was under threat? What if they went walking, they went to dinner, and I hear they were harmed because of their identity? What does that mean to me? As a path worker, I think we need to become aware, more aware of these various group identities, because this is where a lot of the vitriol and the violence is happening in our culture and in the world. We don't hear people talking about just being angry at an individual, although that happens, but it's at groups. We're attacking immigrants, we're attacking people of certain religions, of colors, genders, transgenders. We as path workers need to wrestle with what is our role, not just as a community, but as a path worker. What is my role? We need to bring more consciousness into the path work, into our classes, our curriculum, about the effect of these social identities. Otherwise, we're not really honoring personal responsibility as well as our laws of brotherhood, of justice. So let me pause there and to see to what extent that was clear.
Oh, yes, very clear. For me, there's the question of how do you do this?
Mhm.
I'm part of an anti-racism group. What could we do?
Well, just focusing on that, you are focusing on the social identities, white, the group, the racial groups. You are looking at that. That is an example of what you can do, because as you raise your consciousness, it can inform what kind of action to take. You will automatically behave differently when you're around people of color because of that consciousness. You're less likely to do the usual clueless things that we might do in mixed groups as a white person.
Right.
I think, as I have begun, but I think we can begin building these things into our classrooms, into our TP programs. Certainly, I'm building them into our the helpership programs
Hmm.
I undertake. And I think maybe there are different ways that we can take this on once this idea that I'm sharing is sort of out there. People may have more identities, even just talking about these things more openly.
I think that would be so very helpful.
And believe me, it's controversial. I was involved with another group of people who were looking at how the guide talks about uh, homosexuals. I was seeking the word, sort of an old clinical word, but homosexuals. And in the process, we, sought input from path workers all over the world, how they felt about this. And there are, just as we have in the country, there are path workers who have very different views about what I am talking about, that it has no place. There are people who feel personal responsibility is it. I'm not saying they're good or bad. I'm just saying this consciousness is not embraced worldwide. People have strong feelings about any of these isms. So it is not easy, but I think the more we can talk about it openly, that it's a consciousness that I hope can grow. Because I think we're being called upon in our path work to grow in this way.
Well, it's so clear to me that everyone counts.
Mm. What do you mean, Susan? Say a little more.
That there is something, I'll use the word divine, in
Mhm.
each person, and it may be buried by damage from life. It may be um, shining forth,
Mhm.
but each of us has this remarkable divinity, and and I want I want to foster that.
Mm. That's so beautiful, Susan, really. And I think you speak for a core of what is in so many of us. But then what gets hard is if we meet someone who is different and maybe is annoying, and we go into our defensive behavior, right? So it just means, all right, am I willing enough to stand by everyone counts, to do the work I might need to do to look at my inborn prejudice or beliefs about either that person's identity or their behavior, my judgments. And then also, it might be, I think some people feel that inclusion and acceptance means I have to tolerate things I can't stand. That's not correct. It might mean I have to learn to give feedback to someone, to talk, to speak up and confront something uncomfortable. But it means if I stand by the value and I agree with you, then it means I must do the work that of brotherhood, of kinship with that other, I must then do the personal work to look at what keeps me from really following that value.
Well, Lorraine, I wish you were the spiritual leader of the world.
Oh, God forbid. But thank you for the compliment. But yeah, right. I'm as imperfect as they come. Um, but I love the idea of being able to share and support people to follow these things. Um, but I'm not sure the world is ready to take that. But we find our areas of influence, just like your other question. Where do I have influence to share, to influence in a constructive way? Doesn't have to be big.
Yeah. Yeah, I do believe that small gestures can have unimaginable effects. We have no
Yes,
way of understanding how they may move in the world.
that's exactly right. I have so many favorite quotes, but a quote that I love that magnifies what you're saying. The guy talks about when you toss a stone in a pond and there's ripples that keep going and going. Well, it's like that when you do even a small thing that creates a good consciousness, it ripples into the universe and it keeps going. And I love that part. It keeps going. So you're absolutely right. It's never lost. The smallest thing, every little light that you light, it's not lost.
Wow, that is a very hopeful idea to hold on to.
Yes. Yeah. We can't fall into hopelessness.
Oh, yes, I know, because from hopelessness, nothing positive can come.
Exactly.
It's like a cement barrier laid on top of the person.
Right. Right. And in our pathwork terms, hopelessness is child consciousness. It's like not I can't do anything, nothing that I want to happen can happen. It's when we examine again, we're not bad to feel this, but if you really examine the consciousness is that of the child. There's something, there's always some forward movement. Then I think a great quote that I have on my computer is from his name is blanking out, but he wrote Just Mercy. He's in charge of the innocent. Brian
Oh,
Stevenson
yes,
just came.
I love that
It,
man.
yes. Well, his phrase that he has engraved in the museum, I call it the lynching museum, but that isn't the name, but it's where that
I've been
memorial
there.
is.
I know what you mean.
Oh, well, you might have seen hopelessness is the enemy of justice.
Yes.
I have
I
that on my
bought a bag from the shop and it has that.
wonderful. Yes, yes. So I like to remember that because I fall into that feeling of like, oh, and it's really sadness and a feeling of helplessness.
Would you say that quotation once more?
Yeah. Hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And hopelessness in the pathwork is just child consciousness, that I'm not able to feel my helplessness in the right spirit, that there are some things we are helpless against, but there's never total helplessness. There's always something if we open to our spiritual self for the big capital H help that can
Yes.
come.
Yes. Wow, Lorraine, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for asking me these questions, and it's an honor. It's an honor to be asked.